Alright, we're live. Hello everybody, and welcome to my first ever stream. I'm Trescio. You might have seen me or heard from me in some of the limited Magic the Gathering discords that are around, or on the Draft Skeletons, the Skeleton Crew podcast of Sirkovitz. I was most recently on that podcast a couple of days ago for the draft skeletons that we did for the upcoming Final Fantasy set release. That's now up on Sirkovitz's YouTube channel if you want to go check that out later and see some of our initial speculations about some of the skeletons and how some of the archetypes might play out. But today I'm streaming early access for the Final Fantasy Streamers event. And I'm going to be focusing almost entirely on sealed. So this is pre-release weekend coming up, and I know as a player I very often am looking for as much pre-release preparation or content as I can possibly get going into the weekend. And things like card evaluations are helpful, and archetype skeletons and building them yourself is particularly helpful, so that you start to get an idea of what synergies are present and what kinds of things that you can accomplish. But in particular, what I want to do is see some actual live, like, hey, let's build a sealed pool, not just practice sealed pools like you can get on a number of different sites like DraftSim and some others. But I'm looking for, I want to build a pool, and then I want to actually play the games against players who know what they're doing, and see how did my build function, and are there things I might want to tweak about my build along the way, similar to what you might do at a pre-release event. So, I may oscillate here between, like, some of the, I might do a little bit of draft. I have some other content creators that may be firing up drafts and asking me to join some of those, but I'm going to focus mostly on sealed. I wish that I could do sealed traditional, so that I could simulate the best of three situation that we're going to be seeing at pre-release events, but some sealed is better than no sealed. So let's hop right in. And by the way, I'm going to be streaming the opening of the sealed pool and the building of the deck right now, because I'm a teacher. It's my lunch hour, so I'm going to build it now, and then I'll be back on probably sometime around 5:30. Sometime between the 5 and 6 o'clock hour Central Time, in order to start playing some of the games, and we'll take that as far as it goes, and as far as we get a good feel for the deck, and then we'll probably build another pool in that session as well, if you want to tune back in. So let's hop right in, and let's see what kind of a pool we get. First ever opening of Final Fantasy packs for me. Here we go. And what do we have? Well, we definitely have more than the usual number of rares. We got 9 instead of the minimum expected 6. And notably, we have 5 mythics. So let's take a little bit of a look at these rares. We'll look at them and how they combine with the other cards later, but when you're opening a sealed pool, you always want to look at, do I have some bombs amidst my rares, or in particular, do I have rares that I should be playing that are like, let's say B-level cards or higher, that play well with each other. So we have Clive, Ifrit's Dominant, 5/5 legendary creature for 4 and 2 red. When Clive enters, you may discard your hands and then draw cards equal to your devotion to red, which is, of course, going to be a minimum of 2 due to Clive's 2 red pips. And then you could pay 6 mana again to exile Clive, tapping it, and return it to the battlefield transformed. So you basically play Clive for 6, or play Clive's backside for 6 more. And Clive turns into Ifrit, Warden of Inferno, which is one of the new Saga enchantment creatures, but this is one of the mythic enchantment creatures. So this creature is going to not die by itself. Your opponent's going to have to find a way to remove it, because it's not just going to die and go to the graveyard like a lot of the Saga creatures are. So level 1, if it fights up to one other target creature, it's liable to win unless that creature has Death Touch, since it's a 9/9. And then lore levels 2 and 3, Brimstone, add 4 red. If it has 3 or more lore counters on it, exile it, then return it to the battlefield. In other words, it just gives you a bunch of red mana, and then it eventually turns back into Clive, who's pretty good as a 5/5, right? So if you think about this, this is like a finisher, and it's going to be good in a lot of decks. Obviously, it's just a good card, but it's going to be a particularly good finisher for something like an aggro deck, because you pay 6 mana, you're at the top of your curve, you want to be winning by whatever turn 6 or 7, and it's giving you card draw with a body, and then if that body isn't big enough, you can flip back over and flip it, and now you've got a 9/9 that's fighting another creature, it's eliminating something, and you've got an even bigger threat on the board. So immediately your eyes should be drawn to the other red cards, right? You've got Summon GF Kerberos here, which is another enchantment creature. Now this one is the more standard enchantment creature type, because when you hit Saga Chapter 3, the creature's going to sacrifice itself. But this starts out by surveilling 1. Nothing much for a 4 mana 3/3, right? But then its next 2 chapters are double and triple. When you next cast an instant or sorcery, copy it, choose new targets, and triple when you next cast an instant or sorcery, copy it twice. So obviously this creature is just begging to be in the spells deck. If you look at it, it's a different plan than Clive is, right? I mean, not that Clive couldn't exist in a spells deck as just a big nasty dude that gives you a bunch of additional mana on its backside and lets you cast more stuff, but Kerberos really belongs in a spells deck, and you might actually question whether you want to play this card in other decks. It's going to depend on your density of instant and sorceries, because it's an underrate creature for the mana. I mean, if you look at Clive, you're paying 6 for a 5/5, but you're drawing cards off of that. You're drawing a minimum of 2 cards with this, if you choose to discard your hand, and you want to play this with the emptiest hand you possibly have. So, and by the way, notably, unlike a lot of these effects, if you look back at Clive, you're not discarding your hand and drawing that many cards. You're discarding your hand and drawing as many cards as your devotion to red. And then if we look at the other red touching card, Lightning Army of 1, another mythic. 1 red and a white for a 3/2 first strike trample lifelink. That's a lot of keywords. That's a lot of keywords that play very nicely together. Good on offense, it's good on defense. And when lightning deals combat damage to a player, therefore incentivizing attacking, think aggro leaning here, until your next turn, if a source would deal damage to a player permanent that player controls, it deals double that damage again instead. Not like cards we've seen in the past that say if a non-creature source would deal damage, or if a creature would deal damage. If a source, literally anything, would deal damage to basically anything on your opponent's side, it's getting double. And that's a repeatable ability. Anytime lightning deals damage, the subsequent damage until your next turn, including on your opponent's turn, by the way, that means you're doubling your damage on your opponent's combat phases. All of those things are getting double. Pretty powerful card. You can very well see how Lightning and Clive, like, those cards are going to want to be in the same deck. GF Kerberos, maybe, maybe not, right? This tends to push you a different direction. All right, so then let's look at some of the other cards that touch each other's colors. The next, we've got a bunch of cards touching blue. We've got Emmet Zelch Unsundered, 1 blue and a black, Elder Wizard Mythic, 2/4 Vigilance. When it enters or attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. So you're looting repeatedly with this card. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Emmet Zelch. Now, if you think about a typical game of limited Magic, your odds of putting 14 cards into your own graveyard without help is pretty low. I mean, what this is telling you is that this card really wants to be in a self-mill deck. Because you're not going to naturally fill your graveyard with 14 cards unless you're playing an extremely long limited game. So just look at the reliability of being able to transform Clive, which just says pay 6 mana, and on the next turn when you already have 6 mana, pay it again. Like, that's just a choice. You can choose to spend your mana to do that. You don't need a stiff condition to pull that off. This is a pretty stiff condition. I mean, you play Emmet Selch on turn 3, you're not transforming it for a while. Not unless you have a ton of Turbo Mill cards in your deck. So just realize that. Your chance of turning it into Hades Sorcerer of El, the 6/6 Vigilance, where you may play cards from your graveyard during your turn, and then nothing goes to your graveyard anymore, exile it instead. I mean, you look at the backside ability here, and you probably need to plan on this card being a 3-mana 2/4 Vigilance that loots most of the time. Now, that's not a bad card. As a matter of fact, if you can get anything going off of that draw and that discard, and of course the draw and the discard does help you slowly potentially fill your graveyard if you as you go along there. But just realize that, I mean, this absolutely belongs in a slower deck, and it can be played without ever any plan of flipping it over. Like, looting is fine. You get card selection and card draw, and it's wonderful. Now let's look at the other blue touching rares. Astrologian's Planisphere is one of the job select cards, so when it comes in, it makes a 1/1 hero. This is a job select card that doesn't have the text for job select printed on the card because it has so much other text as a rare. But the job select text says, when this equipment enters, make a 1/1 hero creature token and attach this equipment to it. So this is going to come in as a 1/1 that has this equipment on it, making it a wizard. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and whenever you draw your 3rd card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then it has Equip 2, which is a very cheap equip cost for a job select equipment. It's the cheapest there is. The job select equipment only has equip cost from 2 type 6, I think, and one of them is like, one of the rares I think is pay 3 life, one of the black ones. This is among the cheaper cards. Like, you could reasonably imagine moving this equipment around. Creature gets destroyed because it gets too big and it's got counters, and your opponent wants to destroy it. Then fine, you can move it to a different creature for not very much mana, and you can start accruing counters over there. You obviously want this in some kind of spells deck or non-creature heavy deck. You're not going to be drawing 3 cards all that often. You'll maybe have a couple of cards, 3 if you're lucky, that can pull that off. Obviously, this plays really nicely with Emmet Selch, because Emmet Selch is another way to draw at least a 2nd card in a turn. And it also plays nicely with the Kerberos, because if you're going to have a bunch of non-creature spells, you might have some instants and sorceries, and so blue-red spells, you know, you can start to see how some of the cards play together. And by the way, you have 2 of those. We've doubled up on us Astrologian's Planisphere. So, you know, we've got a density of cards, and this is not one of the many, like more than 50% more than they've ever had in a set legendary creatures that they have in Final Fantasy. There are more legendary creatures in Final Fantasy than there have been in any Magic set. That's a bit of lore about this set. So, but these job select equipments are just additional equipments. Like, you have 2 Planispheres, so those could both be played. And then we look at the Water Crystal, one of the cycle of rare crystals. This is the blue one. 2 blue, and blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, 1 colorless mana. That means the Planispheres, for example, are being cast for only a blue. That's a pretty big deal. A 1/1 with upside, and an equipment that sticks around. Or Emmet Selch is being cast for only blue-black. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many cards plus 4 instead. This is one of the few, like, turbo mill your opponent cards. This is kind of a key card to that. Basically, if you can mill them in any other way, you can turbo that mill. You know, limited deck has 40 cards, your opponent's drawing 7, that means they've got 33 left, and after about 6 or 7 turns, they're going to see 7, 8, 9, 10 more cards. So if you think about how many times you need them to mill 4, that's And of course, they're already milling one or more, right? So they're actually milling 5 minimum by the water crystal's ability. So you start putting them on a mill clock of 5, 5, 5, or sometimes 6, you know, depending on how many cards are being milled. And then you have the ability, each opponent mills cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. So that plays nicely with card draw things like, oh, I don't know, Emmett Selch and Planisphere wants to draw a card. So there's a real package potentially here. We would need to see if we have any other cards in our pool that are able to mill the opponent. But there's some possibility here that we have for, you know, a possible starting point for looking at a build, and we've got the red kind of aggro build over here too. And remember, Kerberos could fit into this same plan. We might not want to go full Grixis with blue, red, black, but it could potentially fit into the plan because it can double up spells. Now imagine if one of those spells, for example, happens to mill your opponent. Now it's happening twice, and so on. And then we do have Chaco Seeker of Paradise. It's touching 2 colors that weren't included here, so unlikely to be played at the same time unless we end up going, you know, 5-color towns or something. But Choco Seeker of Paradise, 1 green, white, blue. Whenever one or more birds you control attack, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may put one of them into your hand. So it obviously wants bird synergy. Oh, how many chocobos can you create? Hey, look, there's bird down there. I mean, these cards beg to be played with each other, right? Then put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield, tapped on the rest of your graveyard. So you're looking at cards based on how many birds you have attacking. So, you know, don't get too aggressive with this. You're not going to be looking at your top like 5, 6, 7 cards very often. Plan on that number being, you know, maybe 1 or 2, 3 if you've got a really dense bird deck, and Choco is potentially one of the birds. And like the other Chocobos, it has landfall, gets +1/+0 till end of turn when a land enters. So it's a 3/5 that on your turn, a reasonable amount of time will be attacking as 4/5. And then you have Traveling Chocobo, 3/2 mythic for 2 and a green. It's a bird. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast bird spells from the top of your library. So these two are pretty nice together, right? You can play stuff off the top of your library, and then you can get some more lands over here. The design here is the birds are helping you turbo through your deck and burp out more birds. And if a land or a bird you control entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability to trigger, it triggers of a permanent, anything, any permanent, it triggers an additional time, including like Choco, right? But this, you notice that Choco is an attack trigger, and this is if a land or bird you control entering the battlefield. But it will double the land ability of Choco, the landfall ability. So, and a lot of the Chocobos have landfall abilities. So these are our rares. Let's continue on here, and we'll see what other cards we have in the mix. I like to go right away, and we already know what our rares and our mythics are. I like to right away look at the uncommons and see what kind of uncommon synergies we might have. Here we've got one of the special guest uncommons, the reprinted Strixhaven Stadium. 3 mana artifact, add a colorless mana. Put a point counter on this artifact. When a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from this artifact. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on this artifact. In other words, it's keeping score, right? If it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all, and that player loses the game. So this can kill you, by the way. It's an awkward card, right? Because it's a form of a manalith, but it's only giving you colorless mana. So it's slowing you down because you're kind of colorless ramping with this card. But when do you want this card on board? When you're playing like a hyper aggro strategy so that you can damage the opponent with 10 different creatures. Of course, if the creature's getting through to the opponent, right, then you're already dealing a damage to them. And how often are you only dealing 1? Because to get to 10 point counters, you have to hit them for 10 life worth of damage. And a lot of times you're going to hit them for more than that. So this is kind of like poison counters in that, are you really going to poison them out first before you kill them? Where is this good? I mean, this would be great in Commander if you're playing an opponent that is gaining 10 million life, right? Because then you say, I don't care how much life you gain, I'm effectively doing the poison counter thing to you. I'm just going to keep pinging you with my little creatures, and eventually you'll die because I'll score 10 points. But you can see how in Limited, I think this is going to be a pretty awkward card. We have a red-white uncommon. When Zidane enters, gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn. So it's stealing your opponent's creature, and it gives it lifelink and haste until end of turn. Hello. And when an opponent gains control of a permanent from you, which by the way will take place at the end of your turn when you give the opponent their creature back. So you're getting paid off one of two ways here. If you steal their creature, and again, think of this in aggro. You often have to play a steal card in like red or red-black. You often have to play that as kind of your finisher. Because you're not putting anything on board, you're stealing their thing, and unless you force them to like block and kill their own stuff, then they're getting that creature back, and you're giving them some tempo as a result of that. You're getting a little bit of temporary tempo, and then you're giving them like kind of permanent tempo back, because you're like, I'm not playing a thing, I'm playing your thing only for 1 turn. But here, either you create a like awkward blocking situation where they have to kill their own stuff. If they kill the creature you steal, then you just killed their creature. Like, good job. If their creature that you stole doesn't die, like they have incentive to let it live, you're getting a treasure token out of it. You're kind of mini-ramping yourself to maybe your finisher in your red-white aggro deck. This is where we start to look. I am going to dump these cards into Seal Deck, and because, sorry, I'm a teacher. My lunch break is over. I have to get back to my day job, and I'll come back and stream this some more. So we have not gotten to deck building yet, but this is actually going to be kind of fun, because what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take these cards, and let's just get, I usually will just take the uncommons and the rares and the mythics, and I will just dump them all into a deck and not care if they go together at all. This, will always get you to more than 40 cards. And then we can go to this deck, and let's add this to our decks. And I'm going to dump this into Seal Deck, and then I'm going to put the Seal Deck, I'm going to get the Seal Deck, I'm going to put the Seal Deck link into chat. And then if any of you want to go back into Seal Deck and look at this, and I'll try to post the video here on YouTube too for those that are coming in afterward, but if any of you want to go into Seal Deck and build this and mess around with it, you can maybe look at your build and see how it compares to my build later. I'll come on live later, again, somewhere between 5 and 6 Central Time tonight. Watch for when I go live. I'd estimate 5:30 maybe. And you can go and in the meantime, if you want to, if you have any time between now and then, you can build this. Great tool for sealed, by the way, if you're not aware of it. Take a look here at Seal Deck. There we have everything in here. I'm going to clear the deck, and then let's sort this by rarity so you can see the 9 rares that we looked at before over on the left hand side. I'm going to publish that to Seal Deck, and then I'll post it here, and I'll post it in the YouTube as well, so anybody that wants to go and check that out can do so. And thank you very much for attending my first stream, and I'll see you in several hours.